I'm Avery Grant, 34 years old, and last Tuesday I walked into a marble-floored bank to take out $99, like it was the lifeline keeping my day from unraveling. The lobby glittered with glass and chrome, the kind of place where hushed voices float under a ceiling that seems built to make you feel small. My jeans were worn at the knees, my old conference t-shirt softened by years of washing, and I could feel eyes move over me the way people glance at a scuff on a new car. The pharmacy would close at 6, and my mother's heart pills were waiting with a bright orange sticker that said, "Urgent refill." The line inched forward. My phone buzzed with reminders, and every minute rang louder than the classical music piped through hidden speakers. I kept telling myself it was simple: show my ID, withdraw $99, drive across town, pick up the medication. Simple, except the branch manager on the other side of the glass wall was my sister. And 3 days earlier, our father was laid to rest without her there to say goodbye. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand your ground when someone looked down on you, go ahead and tap that like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. I grew up in a small Cape-style house where my mother folded laundry at the kitchen table and my father came home smelling faintly of printer ink and success. He opened Crescent Bank with one storefront and a stubborn belief that money should serve people, not the other way around. He taught us to say thank you to tellers by name, to hold doors, to leave a place better than we found it, and to finish what we started, even when no one clapped. I took those lessons into art class and later into design school, chasing the quiet satisfaction of shaping ideas until they fit a need. I made a life that wasn't flashy freelance contracts with nonprofits, church brochures, a rebrand for a children's clinic that paid less than it should have, but meant more than a bigger logo ever could. Some months were lean and some were fine, and no matter what the balance said, I remembered my father's voice calling integrity a currency that never loses value. Sloane chose a different road. She was polished from the day she could borrow our mother's hairspray Brave in a way that made rooms lean toward her, fluent in numbers, and the precise angle of a handshake. She stepped into the bank world like she'd been born wearing a blazer, rising from teller to manager before most of us finished updating our resumes. She loved the rush of closing a deal and the sound of her heels on stone, and somewhere along the way the stories at dinner shifted from people to percentages. By the time I was cobbling together invoices in my studio, she was sending photos from conference rooms with skyline views captioned with words like target and win. We weren't rivals. We were simply moving in opposite directions, two sisters on roads that used to run side by side. When my father got sick, the house got smaller, and the days stretched longer, and the calendar filled with appointments that ate hours whole. I drove him to chemotherapy on gray mornings and sat beside him when the news changed from hopeful to honest. On his last night, when the machines were quiet and the room held only breath and the soft hum of a vent, he pressed my hand and whispered that sometimes money bends people out of shape, and he asked me to keep my shape kindness first, then courage. The funeral came on a Saturday sunlight cutting through stained glass like a promise, and I watched our mother hold it together for a receiving line that felt a mile long. Sloane didn't make it. There was a meeting in another country and a clock that didn't care about ours. I told myself there would be time to talk later to find a way back to something that felt like family. 2 days after we lowered him into the ground, my ATM card vanished into a slot after I mistyped a PIN I've known since college, and the replacement became a 5 to 7 business day problem I couldn't afford. The pharmacy called twice to say the refill was ready, and my mother started splitting her remaining pills in half the way people ration winter heat. $99 sat in my checking account, along with a string of small deposits and careful choices. I just needed someone to hand it to me so I could hand it to a cashier and bring home a bottle with her name on it. Crescent Bank had rules for in-person withdrawals, without a card show ID, verify details. Wait while a note on the account cleared, but rules had never scared me. What gave me pause was walking into Sloane's branch, a place she ran like a cruise ship where everything gleamed because she said so. The lobby was busy that morning, the kind with a soft shuffle of shoes and the occasional snip of a stapler from a desk tucked behind a column. A man in a suit with a watch that could buy a used car spoke low into his phone. A mother kept twin toddlers from turning the velvet ropes into jump ropes. A college kid counted cash twice as if it might change the outcome. I stood between a brass wastebasket and my reflection in a pillar polished to a mirror, reminding myself that cloth and leather don't change who you are. Through the glass wall, Sloane smiled at a cluster of clients, her blazer the color of midnight, and her hair swept into something that made her look like she always knew where she was going. She glanced toward the lobby without seeing me, and for a second I wanted to leave to wait for the replacement card to hope my mother's heart kept time the way it was supposed to. Then the automated voice called next at window 3, and my hands moved before my doubts could finish their sentence. Nina the teller, with a neat name tag and kind eyes, greeted me with the careful cheer of someone trained to steady the room. I slid my driver's license across the counter and explained that I needed $99, that my card had been captured, that I could answer any question she needed about my accounts. She typed, paused, tried again, and then lifted the small black phone by her elbow, speaking quietly to a number she didn't have to look up. I watched the red light blink on a security camera. I watched the time on my screen inch forward. I watched a door at the end of the hall open as the click of heels beat out a rhythm that once meant holiday dinners and now meant policy. Nina hung up and offered an apologetic smile that said this wasn't her call. Sloane stepped into the lobby with the poise of someone used to being the answer, and the room turned its head like flowers to a window. She saw me stopped and measured the distance between us, with her eyes a calculation I recognized from boardrooms and birthdays alike. For a heartbeat, the air felt thin, like the instant before a summer storm breaks over a porch. She opened her mouth to speak, and the classical music seemed to lower itself so every word could find a place to land. Sloane's heels clicked against the marble as she crossed the lobby, every step measured, every sound deliberate. Conversations tapered off one by one until all that remained was the faint hum of the air vents. She stopped just short of the teller counter, arms crossed, the kind of posture that carried both authority and warning. "Avery," she said, voice smooth but cold. Not even a phone call first. I told her I just needed to make a small withdrawal, $99 from my checking account. I tried to keep my voice even steady, respectful. $99. She repeated loud enough for the nearest customers to hear. "You came all the way here for $99. Nina looked uncomfortable, glancing between us, as if she wanted to disappear behind her computer screen. A man in line behind me leaned slightly to listen. Sloane took another step closer, eyes flicking over my jeans, my canvas bag, the scuffed sneakers I hadn't had time to replace. "You still haven't figured out how to budget," she said lightly, as if it were a joke. The sound of her laugh slid across the tile and landed like a bruise. I told her it wasn't about budgeting, I just needed the cash right away for Mom's medication. "Mom's fine," she said, brushing a stray hair from her shoulder. "She doesn't need you worrying her with your drama." It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, as if every syllable was meant to shrink me down to size. The silence in the lobby thickened until it felt like a wall pressing against my chest. A mother holding her toddler by the hand shifted uncomfortably. A young teller at the far window lowered her gaze. Sloane turned to them with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sorry for the disruption," she said. "We maintain certain standards at this branch." Her tone carried easily a performance for the room. Then, with a glance toward Ben, the security guard, she added, "Please escort my sister to the door. She can sort this out elsewhere." Ben hesitated, his hand twitching near the radio clipped to his belt. "Ms. Parker." "She's a customer." "And I'm the branch manager," Sloane interrupted. "Do it!" My throat tightened, but I stayed still. "I'm not causing trouble," I said quietly. "I'm asking for access to my account." She folded her arms again. "Avery, don't make this harder than it has to be. It's embarrassing for both of us. For both of us." I'd heard that phrase before when I dropped out of my first corporate job to freelance, when I wore thrifted dresses to family dinners, when I asked her to drive Mom to a doctor's appointment because I couldn't leave a client meeting. It was her way of turning every moment into a performance she needed to control. The phone on Nina's desk blinked red. Sloane reached over, pressed the button, and spoke sharply into the receiver. "Yes, it's fine. Handle the meeting." "Without me," she said. "Something came up here." Then she hung up and turned her focus back to me. "You couldn't even call ahead. You walk into my branch looking like this, asking for pocket change, and expect me not to react." Her voice had gone louder again, meant for an audience. I could feel eyes on us, strangers, employees, clients, every one of them taking in the contrast between her navy suit and my faded shirt. "I don't want to argue," I said. "Just give me the money and I'll go." "The thing is," she said, tapping her manicured nails on the counter, "we can't have irregular transactions like this without confirming account stability. It's protocol." Nina started to speak, but Sloan cut her off. "Run the verification again and check for any pending overdrafts." Nina's fingers trembled slightly as she typed. "Her balance is fine, Ms. Parker," she said. "There are no overdrafts." Sloan's smile didn't waver. "Double check." Then, without lowering her voice, she added, "Grief can make people impulsive. We have to protect our clients even from themselves sometimes." The word grief hung in the air like a warning bell. It felt deliberate, timed. She wanted everyone to remember the funeral, to picture me as fragile, unstable, a mess. Something inside me gave way, not broken, just hollow. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief that she would do this here, surrounded by strangers. I thought of Dad's last night, of how he whispered that money had changed her. I hadn't understood then. Now I did. Ben took a cautious step forward. "Ms. Parker, maybe she can sit down while you—" "No," she said sharply. "She can wait outside." Her words landed like small blows, quiet but firm. We don't serve people who can't respect themselves enough to act properly in a place of business. Someone gasped. The mother with the child moved toward the exit. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down and saw a name I didn't expect: Philip Rhodes, my father's attorney. Sloan saw it too. A lawyer now. "What are you mixed up in?" she said, laughing again, that high, controlled sound that didn't fit the moment. "He's coming here," I said before thinking. Her eyes narrowed. "Why would Dad's attorney be coming here?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The truth was still forming in my mind, fragile as glass, and I wasn't sure she deserved to hear it first. Nina's computer dinged softly, the transaction still open on her screen. "Ms. Parker," she said quietly, "the account is active. There are no restrictions. She's clear to withdraw." "That'll be all," Nina Sloan said, waving her off. "You're dismissed for now." The motion drew attention again, small, commanding, cruel in its ease. She turned back to me, voice honeyed and sharp. "You think Dad would want to see this? You standing here begging for cash in front of my staff?" The words stung because I could hear Dad's voice behind them, the proud way he'd once spoken about her, the hope he'd carried that we'd run the bank together someday. But that hope had already died once with him. "Dad's gone," I said softly. "He's not here to see anything." Her mouth opened, then closed. For a second, something flickered behind her expression. Grief, guilt. I couldn't tell, but it vanished as quickly as it came. She looked over my shoulder toward the entrance. "Ben, do your job," she said. The guard hesitated again, visibly torn. "Ma'am, maybe we should—" The sound of the glass doors sliding open cut him off. A trio of suits entered, men who didn't belong to this kind of scene. The first was Daniel Whitaker, the bank's CEO, tall and composed even under the fluorescent light. Behind him came Philip Rhodes, the family attorney, briefcase in hand. And trailing them was a man I didn't recognize, his badge glinting with the bank's insignia. Every conversation in the lobby stopped. Even the soft music seemed to fade. Sloane's head turned slowly toward the newcomers, her posture stiffening. Philip gave me a short nod before speaking to her. "Ms. Parker," he said evenly, "we'll need a conference space. Mr. Whitaker is here for a matter involving your father's estate." Her expression faltered for the first time that morning. "My father's estate," she repeated. "I thought that was next month. Certain items required immediate attention," Philip said, glancing briefly at me. "I believe you've already been notified." "I haven't," she said quickly. "I've been out of the country." Philip raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps your assistant forgot to mention it." He looked past her toward Trent, who had just appeared near the hallway. Trent's face drained of color. Sloane's voice thinned. "What exactly is this about?" she demanded. "Let's sit down," Daniel said. "It'll be easier to explain privately, but the eyes of every employee and customer were already on us, and the space felt too small to contain what was coming." Sloane glanced around, calculating, trying to find control in a moment already slipping from her hands. I stood quietly still near the counter, the $99 forgotten for the moment. The attorney placed his briefcase on the nearest desk, the sound of the clasp clicking open echoing across the marble. I could see the embossed seal on the folder inside. My heart kicked once hard because I knew what was written there would end the performance for good. Sloane's voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "What did you do?" I met her eyes. "I didn't do anything I said. Dad did." The air between us felt charged, like the instant before thunder breaks. Somewhere in the distance, a printer started humming, oblivious to the silence gathering around it. Daniel straightened his tie. Philip set his papers in order, and the weight of what was about to unfold settled over every corner of that shining lobby. And for the first time since stepping inside, Sloane looked unsure of where to stand. Philip adjusted his glasses and glanced around the lobby before speaking again. "This isn't a private conversation, but it does need to happen here," he said quietly. "Your father left very specific instructions." The words settled over the room like a change in air pressure. Sloane's smile faltered, her posture still upright but brittle. "If this is about his will," she said quickly, "that's being handled next month. I'm aware." Philip shook his head. "Actually, Ms. Parker, certain clauses required immediate action following the funeral. We're here to fulfill those." He opened the folder, revealing the gold seal of the Grant Family Trust. A few employees had stopped pretending to work. I saw Harold Green stand up from his desk, his glasses halfway down his nose. He studied me for a moment, recognition flickering in his expression. "Ms. Grant," he said softly, "you're Thomas's younger daughter, aren't you?" I nodded. "Your father talked about you often," he said. "Said you had an artist's heart. He was proud of that." The kindness in his voice drew a small sound from Sloane, something between disbelief and annoyance. "Harold, that's enough," she said. "Please return to your desk." But Harold didn't move. He looked at Philip, then back at Sloane. "Your father built this bank on respect, not showmanship," he said gently. "Maybe we should all remember that right now." The lobby was silent except for the faint tapping of Sloane's heels as she shifted her stance. Daniel cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could step into your office," he said to her. "This setting isn't ideal." She hesitated, glancing toward the customers still waiting, then gestured sharply toward the glass-walled conference room. "Fine," she said. "But this had better be quick." We followed her inside. The glass door shut with a soft thud, muting the low murmur outside. The conference table gleamed under recessed lighting, and a tray of untouched bottled water sat neatly in the center. Sloane stood at the head of the table, arms folded, while Daniel and Philip took their seats. I stayed near the doorway, unsure if I was meant to sit at all. "Let's get to it," Sloane said tightly. "What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until the formal reading?" Philip placed a document on the table and turned it toward her. "This," he said, "is a certificate of ownership transfer." Sloane's brow furrowed. "Ownership of what Crescent Bank?" he said simply. "Effective 3 days ago, the controlling interest, 68% of total shares transferred to Ms. Avery Grant." The sound that left Sloane's mouth was small but sharp, like glass cracking under pressure. "That's not possible," she said. "I've worked here my entire career. I manage this branch." "Dad." Her voice caught then steadied. "He would never bypass me." Philip slid another paper across the table. "Your father's instructions were handwritten, witnessed, and notarized. He left no ambiguity. He believed this decision reflected the values he built this institution on." Daniel looked down at the document, his expression unreadable. "I reviewed these personally," he said quietly. "Everything is valid. The board will be notified this afternoon." Sloane's gaze snapped toward him. "You knew?" "Only this morning," he said. Philip reached out to verify compliance before proceeding. I could see the color draining from her face. "Why her?" she asked, voice low. "She's not a banker. She's not even employed here." Philip's tone remained even. "Your father wrote that Avery understands people before numbers, that she sees money as a tool, not a goal. He wanted Crescent to return to those roots." For a moment no one moved. The hum of the air conditioning filled the space. Sloane pressed her palms flat against the table. "This is absurd. She doesn't even know how this place runs." "That can be learned," Daniel said quietly. "Integrity can't." Her head snapped up, eyes bright with disbelief. "You're all making a mistake. This has to be an error." "There's no error," Philip said. "It's binding." He closed the folder carefully. "And there's another matter. A full forensic audit of this branch will begin today, per your father's written request." The words seemed to strike her physically. She sank into a chair, hands gripping the edge. "An audit," she repeated. "Why would he—" "He noted concerns about financial irregularities," Philip said, choosing each word with care. "He intended for a neutral team to review the books immediately upon transition." Daniel looked at her with something like regret. "We'll handle this professionally," he said. "No assumptions, just procedure." Sloane stared at him as if searching for a lifeline. "You can't be serious. You think I—" She broke off, shaking her head. "You think I'd risk everything?" No one answered. I stood still, my hands clasped tightly together, the realization sinking in that the balance between us had shifted forever. The sister who once lectured me about stability now sat silent, her world tilting in real time. Outside, the glass employees watched quietly. Nina stood near her station, eyes wide. Even Ben, the guard who'd been told to escort me out, seemed frozen in place. Philip turned to me. "Ms. Grant," he said, "as majority shareholder, you now have authority over all management positions, including this branch." The sentence carried a weight that filled every inch of the room. Sloane looked up, her voice hoarse. "You wouldn't," she whispered, "you wouldn't take this from me." I said nothing. Daniel folded his hands, his tone measured. "It's standard to suspend current management pending the audit's outcome," he said, "for transparency." Sloane's eyes darted between us, disbelief turning to panic. "This is revenge," she said, suddenly, her voice rising. "You came here to humiliate me in front of everyone." Philip spoke softly. "No, Ms. Parker. We came here to carry out your father's wishes." She pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping across the tile. "He was sick," she said. "He didn't know what he was doing." "He knew exactly what he was doing," Harold said from the doorway. We hadn't noticed him return, but he stood there now, steady and calm. "He told me weeks ago he was making changes." Sloane's eyes filled, though she blinked the tears back fiercely. "You all think I'm some kind of villain." Harold shook his head. "No. But your father saw what this place was becoming. He wanted to stop it before it stopped being his." The silence stretched again until Daniel finally stood. "Ms. Parker," he said formally, "you're suspended pending review. Please turn in your access card and office keys." She sat motionless for a long second, then reached for her lanyard, her hand trembling as she unclipped it. When she placed it on the table, the sound was small but final. Philip gathered the documents, his motions precise. "The audit team will arrive within the hour," he said. "Mr. Whitaker will coordinate access." I found my voice then, steady but quiet. "Nina can process my withdrawal before the meeting begins," I said. "I still need the $99. Daniel nodded once, understanding what I meant. Sloane stared at me, her eyes searching for something I couldn't give an explanation. An apology. Maybe both. As we left the room, the door eased shut behind us. The glass blurred her figure into a reflection that looked smaller somehow, like a memory caught in a window pane. The lobby hummed again with movement as Nina counted the bills into my hand. The cash felt heavier than it should have. I thanked her and slipped it into my wallet, aware of the murmurs starting to ripple through the crowd. Outside sunlight poured across the steps, warm against the cold marble beneath my shoes. I could still feel the weight of Sloane's stare through the glass, the echo of everything that had been said. Behind me, Philip's voice was calm and certain. "It'll take time to settle," he said. "But your father knew what he was doing." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The day had started with a simple errand, a small withdrawal for medicine, and now the ground beneath us had shifted completely. As we stepped into the light, the sounds of the city replaced the hush of the lobby. Traffic hummed, a siren wailed in the distance, and I realized the day wasn't over yet. Something had broken open inside that bank, something that couldn't be put back the same way. And by the end of it, none of us would ever see the other through the same glass again. The next morning I woke up before sunrise. The light outside my apartment had that pale blue stillness that comes right before the city begins to stir. My phone was full of notifications, calls, messages, calendar invites, all about Crescent Bank. By noon, the official announcement would go public. Avery Grant appointed as majority shareholder and acting executive liaison. The title didn't feel real yet. All I wanted was to get through the day without another confrontation, but I knew that was wishful thinking. When I arrived at the branch, the parking lot was already half full. A black sedan idled near the entrance, and a woman in a gray suit stepped out carrying a slim briefcase. "Ms. Grant," she asked, her voice calm, professional. "I'm Laura Benton Deloitte's senior auditor. My team's inside setting up in the conference room." Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp. "We'll begin with branch transaction logs from the last 5 years." I nodded, grateful for her directness. "Thank you for coming so quickly. Your father was respected in our circles," she said. "We'll make sure his wishes are honored." Inside, the mood was different than the day before. Employees stood a little straighter when I passed, though their expressions mixed curiosity with caution. Harold greeted me near the reception area with a quiet nod. "Morning, Ms. Grant," he said. "Never thought I'd see the day. Neither did I admitted. He smiled faintly. "Your father would be proud. He always said the right person doesn't need a title to lead." The conference room that had once been Sloane's domain now held stacks of files, laptops, and 2 printers humming in the corner. Laura's audit team moved with quiet efficiency, scanning documents and cataloging data. Daniel arrived soon after reviewing schedules and security clearances. "I've reassigned Sloane's access codes," he told me. "It will deactivate her accounts by end of day." His tone was careful, respectful, but cautious, as though testing my boundaries. By mid-morning, the first findings began to surface. Laura called me aside, holding a thin folder. "There are irregular entries," she said, lowering her voice. "Vendor payments without corresponding contracts, consulting fees to non-existent firms. It's early, but the pattern is consistent." I felt the air leave my chest. "Consistent across how many years?" "So far, 5, she said. "Possibly more. We'll confirm with the forensic team this afternoon." Through the glass wall, I saw Nina helping customers with her usual steady grace, unaware of the storm building upstairs. Ben stood by the main doors, alert but uneasy. Harold was on the phone, probably fielding questions from staff at other branches. The bank looked normal, almost peaceful, and yet everything inside it was shifting. Just before noon, Daniel approached me with his tablet. "Ms. Grant, the board wants a preliminary report by Friday," he said, and the auditors requested access to Sloane's company laptop and phone. I hesitated. "Her personal belongings already separated," he said. Ben handled it. The glass door opened then, and conversation outside the room stopped. Sloane stood in the doorway, flanked by Trent. Her eyes were rimmed red, her suit rumpled. "I need to talk to you," she said. The room went silent except for the faint whir of the printer. Laura looked to me for direction. I nodded toward the hall. 5 minutes, I said. We stepped out into the corridor. The light from the tall windows made her look smaller, younger, like the sister I used to share secrets with before business and ambition had built walls between us. "Avery, please," she said. "You can't let them do this. They're tearing my work apart. Everything I've built." "They're following protocol," I said. "It's what Dad requested." She shook her head. "He was sick when he wrote that will. He didn't understand what this would do." Her voice broke, then soft enough that the people nearby pretended not to hear. "You think I don't miss him? You think this is easy for me?" I wanted to believe her. But the numbers in those folders told a different story. "The audit isn't about punishment," I said. "It's about clarity." "Clarity," she echoed, bitterness threading through the word. "You just want to see me fail." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched a customer walk past holding a deposit slip, unaware of the tension hovering inches away. "Sloane," I said quietly, "the only thing I want is for this bank to survive." She looked down at her hands. "If you suspend me, I lose everything. The condo, the car they're tied to my salary. I can't." Her words stopped as Laura stepped into the hall. "Ms. Grant, we're ready for your review," she said gently. Sloane's head snapped up. "You're really doing this." "It's already in motion," I said. "There's no stopping it now." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. "Dad always said you were too forgiving," she murmured. "Maybe that's still true." She turned and walked away before I could answer. Back in the conference room, the audit deepened. Transaction after transaction showed inconsistencies, duplicate invoices, missing authorizations payments to names that didn't match any employee list. Each discovery made the air heavier. Laura moved methodically, her calm professionalism anchoring the chaos. By evening, the picture was undeniable. Daniel looked up from his notes. "We'll need to inform federal regulators," he said. "This goes beyond internal review." His words made the room still again. Philip, who had rejoined us late in the day, nodded grimly. "Your father suspected as much," he said. "That's why he made the audit clause irrevocable." The sun had set by the time we packed up the files. Outside, the city lights reflected in the glass like small fires. I stood by the window, watching the traffic below, while voices murmured behind me. Harold approached quietly. "She's still your sister," he said. "Whatever comes next, remember that." I know I said, but I also know what he asked me to do. He nodded, his eyes kind. "Thomas trusted you for a reason." When the room finally emptied, I sat alone at the long table, the documents spread before me. The faint smell of toner and paper filled the air. Each page felt heavier than the one before it. I thought about Dad's last days, his quiet persistence, the notebooks he kept by his bedside. He must have known what he was uncovering, and still he believed in something better for this place. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Evelyn. "Did you get the medicine? I saw the news about the bank. Please come home tonight if you can." I stared at the screen for a long moment, the weight of the day pressing against my ribs. Then I gathered the papers into a neat stack and turned off the light. As I stepped into the corridor, the motion sensors flickered on, lighting my path toward the exit. The branch was quiet now, every shadow holding the echoes of what had happened. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. Across the street, a news van had already parked under the streetlight waiting for a story that was still unfolding. I paused at the curb, watching the red and blue reflections ripple across the glass facade of the bank. Tomorrow would bring headlines, meetings, and consequences I couldn't yet name. But tonight, there was only the sound of my footsteps on the pavement and the memory of my father's voice reminding me to stay steady no matter how strong the current. Somewhere behind those glass walls, the truth was still being sorted, number by number. And by morning, the world would begin to learn what he had seen long before anyone else dared to look. The next 48 hours moved like a tide that wouldn't stop rising. By Wednesday morning, Laura's audit team had uncovered enough to fill binders stacked 2 feet high. Each folder carried the same pattern: false vendor names, inflated contracts, and signatures that didn't match anyone on record. The deeper they looked, the more threads began to connect, weaving a picture that could no longer be ignored. Daniel called a meeting before the branch opened. The blinds were drawn, and even the hum of the coffee maker felt too loud. Laura stood at the front with her laptop open, the projector throwing spreadsheets across the wall. Her voice stayed steady as she explained how the discrepancies pointed to deliberate manipulation, not clerical error. Over 5 years, she said approximately $3 million were redirected through shell accounts tied to Ms. Parker's authorization codes. No one spoke. The words hung there heavy and final. Daniel rubbed a hand across his chin. "We'll have to contact federal authorities," he said. "This exceeds our jurisdiction." I nodded, though it felt like I was watching from outside my own body. It wasn't just the number. It was the certainty in Laura's tone, the quiet professionalism that left no room for misunderstanding. By mid-morning, agents from the Financial Crimes Division arrived, 2 women in dark suits, their badges clipped at their belts. The lead investigator introduced herself as Rachel Meyer. She was composed, direct, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We'll need full access to all digital archives," she said to Laura, "and we'll want to speak with Ms. Parker as soon as possible." Sloan hadn't been seen since our brief encounter the day before. Her office was locked, her phone unreachable. Trent, pale and nervous, said she'd taken personal time. Daniel authorized the agents to search her company records immediately. Watching them move through the glass hallways was surreal, strangers in the heart of what my father built, unfolding years of secrets, one keystroke at a time. By afternoon, news started to leak. A financial reporter camped outside the main entrance with a microphone, asking passing customers for comments. Employees whispered in clusters near the break room. Harold kept the operation steady, directing staff with calm authority, reminding everyone that the bank's legacy mattered more than the scandal. I admired his steadiness. He had weathered decades of financial storms and still managed to treat people with patience. Late that evening, I found myself back in my father's old office, the one Daniel now used. The mahogany desk still bore faint scratches from years of his habit of tapping a pen while thinking. Daniel handed me a document folder marked Preliminary Findings. "We'll have a press briefing Friday," he said. "Transparency is the only way forward." I traced my fingers over the embossed crest of Crescent Bank. "He would have wanted that," I said. Daniel's expression softened. "He'd be proud you're doing this the right way." The next morning, Rachel returned with new information. "Ms. Grant, we traced 2 of the fake vendor accounts to a corporate mailbox registered under your sister's name," she said quietly. "The funds were funneled through secondary accounts in Chicago and Phoenix. She didn't act alone, but she authorized the transfers." She paused. "Do you know where she might be staying?" I hesitated, then told her about Sloane's condo near the waterfront. The agents left immediately. When they returned hours later, their faces said everything. "She wasn't there," Rachel said, "but we found her laptop, personal files, and bank statements. The evidence is overwhelming." That afternoon, the FBI made the arrest. Sloane was found at her condo's parking garage sitting in her car, engine off. News crews captured the scene from across the street, their cameras flashing, as agents escorted her into an unmarked sedan. By evening, every major outlet had the headline, "Branch Manager Arrested in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Investigation." I sat at home with the TV muted, watching her photo appear on the news ticker. The image they used was from a corporate event, her smiling confidently in that navy suit she wore so often. I remembered her telling me once that blue meant power and control. Now the same color looked like armor she couldn't take off fast enough. The following morning, Philip called to say the preliminary court hearing was set for the next day. "It's moving quickly," he said. "They'll likely release her on bail, but the charges are serious. Embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of records, minimum sentence 10 years. His tone was steady, but I could hear the weight behind it. At the branch, employees gathered in small groups, unsure what to say. Nina approached me near the lobby. "She used to scare us," she admitted quietly. "We always knew something wasn't right, but no one dared question her. Thank you for letting the truth come out." Her sincerity caught me off guard. I realized then how many people had been working under that pressure for years, afraid to speak up. By the end of the week, the board convened an emergency session. Daniel presented a plan for restoring customer confidence, freezing executive bonuses, increasing oversight, and establishing anonymous ethics channels. "We can't erase what happened," he said, "but we can make sure it never happens again." I agreed and signed off on every measure. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. The lights were low, and the scent of her chamomile tea drifted through the air. She looked tired but relieved to see me. "I watched the news," she said softly. "I'm sorry it came to this." I sat beside her, the silence stretching between us. "He suspected it," she continued. "Your father. When he was sick, he told me he'd noticed missing funds. He didn't want to believe it was Sloane." Her voice trembled. He thought time would make her remember who she was. I glanced at the framed photo on the mantel, Dad smiling beside the 2 of us, in the bank's first office, back when the walls were still unfinished drywall. He'd believed in both his daughters, in the idea that integrity could be taught like any other skill. Maybe he thought love could keep it alive. Mom reached over, squeezing my hand. "He'd be proud of you," she said. "Not because you inherited the bank, but because you did what he couldn't." Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table long after she went to bed. The house creaked softly, the sound familiar and comforting. Outside, the streetlights reflected on the rain-slick pavement. My phone buzzed with a new message, Rachel again. Charges filed, full cooperation appreciated. Simple words, but they carried the finality of a door closing. I turned the phone face down and opened my father's old notebook, the one he kept beside his chair during his last months. On the inside cover, in his careful handwriting, were 3 words: "Truth withstands time." The ink had faded, but the meaning hadn't. The next morning I went back to the bank early. The lobby was quiet except for the sound of paper being restocked and phones ringing in the distance. Nina waved as she unlocked her teller window. Ben nodded from his post by the door. Harold passed with a clipboard in hand, already setting the day's schedule. For the first time, it felt like a place beginning to heal. I stood near the front desk watching the morning sun stretch across the floor. There was still so much to fix: policies, trust, reputation, but the foundation was stronger now. What my father built had survived worse storms than this. By noon, Daniel joined me for a brief meeting about next week's press statement. As we walked toward his office, he glanced at me. "You handled this with grace," he said quietly. "Not many could." I nodded, though words felt unnecessary. When I stepped outside that afternoon, the air was crisp, the sky a clean winter blue. Across the street, reporters had moved on to the next story. The cameras were gone. For the first time in days, the steps of Crescent Bank were empty. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at the glass facade reflecting the light. The building looked different now, still modern, still proud, but there was a quietness to it, as if it was catching its breath. The truth was out. The damage was done. But beneath the noise and the loss, something solid remained: what my father built, and what I now had to protect. And as I walked to my car, the echo of his voice followed me, not a command this time, but a reminder. The hardest part of justice isn't finding the truth. It's living with what comes after. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, the kind of scent that reminded me of libraries and waiting rooms. The trial hadn't begun yet. This was only the preliminary hearing, but the air carried a quiet weight that made every footstep sound too loud. I sat in the second row beside Philip, the estate attorney, while Daniel spoke softly with one of the prosecutors near the front. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters had already filled the corridor outside, their questions echoing through the doors before the bailiffs closed them. Sloane entered with her lawyer a few minutes later. The gray suit she wore hung differently now, loose around her shoulders, as if even the fabric had lost confidence. Her wrists were free, she'd been released on bail, but the sight of her surrounded by uniformed officers still made my stomach tighten. She glanced toward me briefly, her expression unreadable, then looked away before I could offer anything like comfort. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Helen McCarthy carried herself with quiet authority, her tone firm, but even as she reviewed the case summary. "We are here to determine pre-trial conditions for Ms. Parker," she said. The clerk read through the charges: embezzlement wire, fraud, falsification of records. Each word echoed through the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. Sloane didn't flinch, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Rachel Meyer took the stand first, describing the investigation in precise, steady language. She detailed the transfers, the fake vendor accounts, the forged signatures, all of it linked through years of digital records. Her professionalism left no space for denial, only the heavy truth that could no longer be ignored. I listened motionless, the air feeling thinner with every word. Sloane's attorney tried to soften the picture, arguing that she had been under pressure, that the toxic corporate culture encouraged shortcuts and blurred ethics. But every argument dissolved when the financial trails were displayed on the monitor lines of transactions connecting names, accounts, and timestamps that no one else could explain away. When it was over, the judge set a date for the full trial and ordered house arrest until then. Her tone held no cruelty, only finality. "Ms. Parker," she said, "you are expected to comply fully with these conditions. The court will allow leniency if restitution is pursued in good faith." The gavel struck once. The sound seemed to close the air around us. Sloane stood slowly, her lawyer whispering beside her, then turned toward me for the first time since she'd entered. For a moment she looked less like the woman who once commanded rooms, and more like the sister I remembered, fragile and tired. "Avery," she whispered as she passed. I didn't move. There were no words that could bridge what stood between us, not yet. Outside, the reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions. Daniel guided me through the crowd, shielding me from the worst of it. "You handled this with grace," he said quietly once we reached the car. "Your father would have been proud." I nodded but couldn't answer. Pride wasn't what I felt. just a dull ache where family used to fit. That night, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table long after midnight. The house was quiet, the glow from the streetlight painting the walls in soft gold. My mother's voice played faintly in my head from our last conversation. He hoped she would come forward herself. I thought about that as I opened the letter my father had left, one I hadn't read all the way through before. His handwriting was careful, the loops of each word deliberate. If you ever find yourself at odds with your sister, remember this: forgiveness doesn't erase accountability, it only makes healing possible. The next morning, I met with Daniel and the board. The bank's recovery plan was taking shape: new oversight committees, stricter auditing, public transparency reports. Harold presented a list of employees recommended for promotion. Nina Lopez, he said, tapping the paper, should take over Sloan's branch. She's earned it. The room agreed without hesitation. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to hope. By noon, I visited the branch myself. The lobby felt different, lighter, quieter, almost peaceful. Nina greeted me at the front desk, still in her simple navy uniform, her expression both nervous and proud. "Ms. Grant," she said, "the staff wanted to thank you for standing up for us. We've all been waiting for this change." I smiled. "You earned it, not me," I said. She glanced down, her voice catching slightly. "We just needed someone to believe the truth mattered." Later that day, Rachel called with an update. "The restitution agreement is in motion," she said. "Ms. Parker is cooperating. She's agreed to repay every cent plus penalties." Her tone softened then. "She also asked me to tell you she's sorry." I closed my eyes for a moment, the words heavier than I expected. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means something." Weeks passed before I saw Sloan again. Her attorney requested a brief meeting to discuss the restitution plan. We met at a small law office downtown Neutral Ground. She arrived looking pale, her hair pulled back simply, her hands folded neatly on the table. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said before anyone else could speak. "I just wanted you to know I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, one transaction, one excuse, and then I couldn't stop lying to keep up with it." I listened without interrupting. The words came haltingly, but they were real. She talked about the pressure, the fear of failing, the need to prove herself worthy of Dad's legacy. When she finally stopped, the room felt still again. "You hurt a lot of people," I said quietly. "But you have a chance to make it right." She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "I will," she said, "even if it takes the rest of my life." As we left, she turned to me at the doorway. "Do you think he'd forgive me?" she asked. I met her eyes and saw something I hadn't in years: honesty. "He'd want you to forgive yourself first," I said. The following week, Crescent Bank reopened its downtown branch under Nina's management. The morning sunlight filled the lobby, bouncing off the marble floors. Customers began returning, some with cautious smiles, others with quiet relief. Harold led a short meeting thanking the staff for staying through the storm. As I listened, I thought about the way my father used to stand in this same space, reminding us that a bank wasn't about money. It was about trust. By the end of that day, I walked the halls one last time before leaving for the evening. The sound of printers, the low hum of conversation, the soft clink of coins being counted, it all felt familiar again. A place returning to its rhythm. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the steps. I paused at the door, looking back through the glass. For months, this building had been a place of pain and reckoning, but now it was also something else, a reminder that even after the deepest losses, there could still be restoration. When I got home, Mom was waiting with tea and the faint scent of lavender. She set the cup in front of me and said simply, "You did what needed to be done." I nodded, and for the first time the weight on my chest began to ease. But even as calm settled in, I knew it wasn't over yet. The trial was still ahead, the headlines not yet finished. Somewhere across town, Sloan was preparing to face what came next. And I couldn't help but wonder if this time, when the truth finally came to light in full, it might not destroy her, but save her instead. The morning of the sentencing was gray, and still the kind of morning when the sky looked like it was holding its breath. I sat in the courthouse lobby, waiting for the bailiff to call our case. The polished floor reflected the overhead lights, and every sound echoed: a shoe tapping, a cough, a page turning. It was quiet, but there was tension in the air that seemed to hum through the walls. When Sloane entered, she wasn't in a suit this time. She wore a plain blue blouse and dark slacks, her hair pulled back neatly. The confident posture I'd always known was gone. She looked smaller, somehow, humbled. Her attorney carried a folder thick with documents, restitution plans, letters of cooperation, proof of repayment. I wondered how much of that would matter in the end. Judge McCarthy presided again, calm and composed. She began by reviewing the charges: embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of records, then acknowledged the cooperation that followed. Ms. Parker, she said, your actions caused significant harm, both financial and personal. However, the court recognizes your willingness to take responsibility. Rachel Meyer testified briefly, confirming that Sloane had provided full access to records, repaid every cent through liquidated assets, and helped identify accomplices. The judge listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When she finally delivered the sentence, her tone was steady. 5 years in federal custody, she said, with eligibility for parole after 2 contingent on continued restitution. The words landed like a closing door. Sloane exhaled slowly, then turned to look at me. For the first time in years, she didn't look like the woman who'd once dismissed me in public or compared me to her reflection of success. She looked like my sister. She mouthed 2 words I understood without hearing "thank you." After the gavel struck, the bailiff escorted her toward the side exit. I stood as she passed. She gave a small nod, no longer proud, no longer pretending. It was a moment stripped of everything but truth. I didn't reach for her, but I held her gaze until she disappeared through the door. Outside, the air felt cooler than it should have been for spring. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters again, but their tone had shifted. They spoke not of scandal now, but of closure. I kept walking, the sound of their questions fading behind me. By the time I reached the car, the first drops of rain had started to fall. That evening, I returned home to find Mom sitting in her usual chair, the news quietly playing on the television. They were showing footage from the courthouse, Sloane sentencing my statement afterward. "I saw it," Mom said softly. "You spoke well." I sat across from her, taking in the warmth of the lamplight and the faint smell of chamomile. "She'll be all right," I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself. Mom nodded. "Your father used to say storms reveal more than they destroy," she said. "Maybe this one did too." She reached for my hand, her grip steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "You gave her a chance to start again. That's something he couldn't do in the end." A week later, I returned to Crescent Bank for the quarterly meeting. The boardroom felt different now. Open, collaborative, no tension hiding in the corners. Daniel outlined the progress since the audit. Customer confidence had rebounded, deposits were up, and the bank's community programs were thriving again. Nina joined us for the first time as branch manager, her notes organized and her voice clear. She spoke about a new outreach project, financial literacy workshops for low-income families. "We'll name it the Grant Initiative," she said, "to honor the bank's founder." Her words filled the room with a quiet pride. Harold smiled from the far end of the table. "Your father always believed education was the best safeguard against greed," he said. Daniel agreed. "It's a fitting legacy," he added. "Avery, would you be willing to speak at the launch?" I agreed, though the idea made my chest tighten a little. Public speaking had never been my comfort zone. But when the day came, the auditorium was full. Customers, employees, local families, all gathered under the banner of something new. The lights were warm on my face as I stood at the podium. I began simply. I talked about the value of trust, about how Crescent Bank had been built not just on numbers, but on people. I mentioned my father's belief that money was a tool, not a measure of worth. And I ended with a story the day I'd walked into a branch needing $99 to buy my mother's medicine, and how that moment had changed everything. The audience was silent for a long beat, then applause rippled through the room, steady, respectful, not loud, but sincere. When I stepped down, Nina hugged me. "You turned everything around," she said quietly. I shook my head. "We all did," I said. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something resembling calm. The headlines faded. The bank stabilized. My design clients returned, and I found myself working again late into the night, the familiar rhythm of creation, a kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd missed. Then one morning an envelope arrived in the mail, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility 2 counties over. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Avery," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I'm learning. I'm taking classes in accounting, real ones this time. Maybe one day I can teach business ethics, help others avoid my mistakes. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I'm trying to build something honest out of what's left." It was signed simply Sloan. I sat with the letter for a long while, tracing the familiar loops of her handwriting. It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It was just truth, plain and unadorned. And somehow that was enough. That weekend I drove out to the coast. The air smelled of salt and wind, and the sky stretched wide and pale over the water. I found a quiet spot by the dunes, watching the waves rise and break against the shore. The steady rhythm felt like breathing. I thought of my father, the long hours he'd spent building something meant to last. I thought of Sloan beginning her own rebuilding somewhere behind walls and fences. And I thought of Mom still tending to her garden each morning, finding peace in the smallest routines. The ocean rolled on, endless and patient like time itself. Some things I realized weren't about winning or losing. They were about surviving the storm and learning how to live honestly afterward. As the sun dipped low, I stood to leave. The wind tugged at my hair, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a group of children down the beach. I smiled at the sound the same way I imagined my father would have, quietly, without fanfare. Back at the car, I tucked Sloane's letter into my bag. It felt less like closure and more like a beginning. Somewhere ahead, there was still work to do at the bank, at home, within us all. But for the first time in a long while, the path forward felt clear. And as I drove back toward the city, the lights on the horizon shimmered through the dusk like a promise waiting to be kept. The following spring arrived softer than any I could remember. The city felt alive again, trees blooming along the sidewalks, people laughing outside cafes, the air carrying that faint sweetness that always meant things were starting over. At Crescent Bank, the rhythm had settled into something strong and steady. The mistakes of the past hadn't been erased, but they'd been faced honestly, and that was enough to build on. Our community program grew faster than anyone expected. The grant initiative named for my father became more than just a workshop. It was a place where people could sit down and talk about money without shame or fear. Every month, I watched small business owners, teachers, and families gather in the same building where not long ago humiliation had taken place. Now there was laughter echoing off those same marble floors. Nina proved herself as a natural leader. She handled each challenge with patience and empathy, reminding everyone that progress didn't have to come through perfection. It came through people trying their best every day. Harold retired, now visited once a week, just to offer advice and stories from the old days. He always said my father would have approved of how things turned out. Daniel continued steering the bank with calm steadiness, his presence reminding me that integrity could be both strong and kind. At home, life found its balance too. Mom's health improved, her smile returning more often than her sighs. We planted herbs in her garden that summer, mint, basil, lavender, and spent long evenings sitting on the porch listening to the crickets hum in the dark. Sometimes she'd mention Dad, not with sadness anymore, but with gratitude. He'd be proud, she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper. You carried his values forward when they mattered most. I didn't answer right away, but the words stayed with me. About 6 months after Sloane's sentencing, another letter arrived. She wrote about the small things, her job in the library, the books she'd started reading again, the counseling sessions that helped her make sense of it all. She said she'd finally begun to understand what our father meant about strength not being about control, but about character. I used to think power came from being above others, she wrote. Now I see it's about standing beside them. She ended the letter with one sentence that made me pause. If you'll let me, I'd like to help with the grant initiative when I'm released. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer beside Dad's old notebook. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step in that direction. And maybe that was what healing really looked like, not a sudden peace, but small, steady moments where hope quietly replaced anger. Months turned into a year, and the bank's first anniversary under the new mission arrived. We hosted an event downtown. Nothing extravagant, just a simple gathering to honor the progress everyone had made. There were speeches, laughter, a few tears. I stood near the back watching the employees, some new, some who'd weathered the hardest days, standing together like a family, rebuilt from honesty instead of fear. When I spoke that evening, I didn't use notes. I talked about my father, about the day I came into the bank, needing only $99, and about how that moment had changed the course of everything that followed. Sometimes I said the smallest request reveals the biggest truths, and sometimes the hardest days show us who we really are. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was warm, like a shared heartbeat. After the event, I stepped outside into the cool night. The city lights shimmered against the river, reflecting gold across the water. I thought of Sloane again, still serving her time, still rebuilding in her own way. I hoped she would find peace when she came home, not through what she regained, but through what she'd learned to let go of. As I walked toward my car, I passed the framed withdrawal slip hanging in the bank's lobby, the same one from that day preserved behind glass. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "Integrity begins with courage." I ran my fingers over the words before leaving, feeling the truth of them settle deep inside me. It's strange how a single act of cruelty can set a whole story in motion, and how with time, even that pain can lead to something good. My father was right. Money is only a tool, but character once tested becomes a foundation that never truly cracks. These days, when people ask about the bank's transformation, I tell them it wasn't luck or strategy that saved it. It was truth. Facing it, owning it, and choosing to act on it even when it hurt. That's what rebuilt everything: our reputation, our family, and my faith in second chances. If you've ever been underestimated, or if someone's tried to make you feel small for standing by your values, I hope my story reminds you that dignity doesn't need validation. It simply needs to endure. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that no matter how dark things seem, honesty and compassion can still light the way forward.